Hi, I'm Louise Mugar, and this is Pat Grubb. Together, we publish the All Point Bulletin newspaper in Point Roberts, Washington. Point Roberts, like everywhere, has its pluses and minuses. While not immune to the pressures of growth, Point Roberts has managed to maintain a mostly rural atmosphere in a sea of suburbia that lies just north of the Canadian-U.S. border. The border is the subject of this episode.
All of us who live in Point Roberts are aware of the impact of the border upon our lives. Its effects are often psychological as well as physical. Officials ask us where we are going, what goods we are carrying in our car, and what the purpose is of our trip. We subconsciously weigh the likelihood of a border lineup before we leave our houses for a short trip to a store or to a movie.
In 1981, there were 800,000 vehicle crossings into Point Roberts. Last year, there were 2,600,000. Lower gas and food prices, new restaurants, real estate, and recreational opportunities, all these and more have made our area very attractive to visit. These are positive reasons with positive benefits for the local economy and the people who work here.
But that still doesn't make it easier for residents to get across the border. In this episode, we talk to people who are working on ways to make it more efficient for residents to get across that border while still keeping in mind the very positive impact that visitors have on Point Roberts and its economy.
Oh, it's terrible. I'm a resident of Point Roberts, and I can't get anywhere on the weekends. It's pretty bad.
You want it fixed?
Yeah, I think they should have like a residence gate or some type of, access to in and off the point. It'd be nice.
Dan Levy is one of the 5 members of the newly formed Citizens Advisory Committee to Whatcom County on border traffic in Point Roberts.
But in order to advise the county, a committee was formed with Point Roberts residents to provide the input.
Okay. Now, could you tell us a bit about your personal background and how you see this as a plus for the advisory committee?
Well, I think the most important thing is I'm a Point Roberts resident. I've lived here for about 5 years, but also I work in the field of transportation planning. I have a degree in transportation planning and operate a business out of Tawasin.
Great. Well, that would definitely be an asset. Now, I'm really clear that you're not speaking for the committee, but could you tell us, just in your personal view as a resident of the Point, what you see as the major problems the local border crossing poses for the residents here?
Okay. I'm actually, the way the committee is structured, there's a representative from each of the elected boards, and I'm representing the Fire Commission. And of course, one of my priorities will be looking at traffic congestion as it affects emergency vehicle access, both on the U.S. side, and access for BC Ambulance coming in from the Canadian side. So that's one major issue that, of course, is very important to residents. The second thing is that, just personally, I'd like to see a provision made for a residents-only lane at the border, ideally in both directions, but certainly on the U.S. side, heading into Canada. If there are any major traffic flow changes made at the border, it will certainly have an impact on circulation through the rest of the Point, whether there'll be more shortcutting through residential streets or changing the length of the backups. So it's probably the most important and most serious problem, but it will affect other issues.
How do you personally think the community can give input to your committee without having to start the whole thing back at square one?
Well, I think the way the committee's been structured by the county will provide that opportunity. The 4 elected boards all have nominated members to this committee, as well as the Voters Association and the Taxpayers Association, I believe. So each organization will have an opportunity, or citizens through those organizations have an opportunity to provide the input. And I think that structure really should be quite responsive to the community's needs.
Okay, great.
Well, I've lived here just about a year, and I'm finding the border in the mornings going to work is okay. The main problem I have is on the weekends, trying to get out and get back in. Getting back in is the main problem. So it sure would be nice if we could have a resident lane coming back in with a sticker so there wouldn't be this hassle of planning your life around coming back and forth through the border.
Bruce Mills is with Whatcom County Engineering, liaison with Point Roberts Border Traffic Advisory Committee.
Bruce, you've acted as liaison for Whatcom County for the last year and a half.
with traffic consultants dealing with the Point Roberts border crossing. And this is known to Point Roberts residents as the Transpo study. Am I right?
That's correct.
Okay. Perhaps you could give us a brief history of how the study came to be and how the county became involved, and last of all, how the residents of Point Roberts participated in the study.
Sure. The study actually came to be as a result of the obvious increase in the traffic congestion, especially in the vicinity of the border and the crossing there. And also, many citizens had written many letters, which certainly piqued the council and the executive's interest. So in 1990, the council authorized a study to examine the situation at the border, the traffic congestion, and to propose solutions. And so Transpo was hired in September, actually, of 1990, and worked on the study, which actually took pretty close to a year. They completed the final version of the study in November 1991. As far as the public involvement, we had 3 public meetings with the study, and we had the consultants come up to Point Roberts. They were well attended by upwards to 70 people at a couple of the meetings. And we had opportunities there where we gave out questionnaires for people to fill out and to return to our office or else to the consultant. And I also know that there were numerous letters as well from citizens and phone calls to the engineering department, to the consultants, and also to council members. So the public was pretty well involved in this process.
Thank you. Now, could you tell us the outcome of the study and what the community of Point Roberts can expect to see happening in the coming months as a result of the study?
Sure. Basically, the outcome of the study was that it proposed several short-term and long-term solutions. And the study itself, incidentally, is available. Copies are available at the library in Point Roberts. The official name of the study was the Point Roberts Border Crossing Transportation Study by Transpo, the Transpo group. In any event, short-term solutions, what they looked at actually, the immediate solution that was looked at was some sort of a limited access lanes along Roosevelt. They proposed perhaps a windshield sticker system similar to the PACE program, where residents would be able to utilize probably one leg, like the east leg of Roosevelt, east of Tyee, so that they wouldn't have to be queued up along Tyee itself. They could go over to Roosevelt, and that would actually be signed off so that it would be something that would say some local access only or access passes only, something like that. So that was one of the short-term solutions. They also said that a windshield sticker would probably be the best way to start, and they had mentioned in their study a possibility of a key card gate, which of course would be more costly, but that's why they thought maybe the windshield sticker would be the way to begin.
We understand that the state of Washington now allows a 1 cent per gallon tax to be collected in Point Roberts to be used for road improvements. Can this also be used for border improvements?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, the funds can be used for any transportation-related items, including design and right-of-way acquisition, those type of items. In fact, the money that's collected must be spent within the Point Roberts Transportation Benefit District. The other thing that is useful with these funds is that they don't just have to be used all by themselves. They can be used with other matching or with other funding sources. They can be used as a match.
Okay. Now, Mr. Mills, what other sources of funds are available to improve the existing border crossing in Point Roberts?
Okay, primarily for our construction program, we have the county road fund, which actually comes from property taxes. Other monies that are collected include the state gas tax and the timber harvest revenues. Those funds, the state government actually has and administers several road improvement fund projects with those funds, and they're available on a competition basis, so we have to compete statewide with all other counties and cities for those type of funds. Other funds that are available for roadway improvement projects are also developer fees that can be assessed when they come into the county with a proposed development, and we can actually assess a certain money or project for them to complete as part of their development.
Something for people of Point Roberts where they didn't have to wait for all the gas lineups and stuff like that, their own lane maybe, where they could go through.
You're in favor of a residence lane?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right.
Ruby White's business is located just south of the border crossing. She's also a member of the advisory committee.
What do you think of the recent transpo study?
I think it was a farce.
Can you tell us a little?
Well, they did it from afar, from Bellevue, and Jimmy Buffett uses a line in one of his songs, "Don't try to describe the ocean if you've never seen it," and I don't know how in the hell they thought they could sit down in Bellevue and solve traffic problems that they didn't come up here and experience. And they couldn't, and they didn't.
Tell me what you think about the idea of a residence-only lane to exit and enter the point.
Well, I thought a residence-only lane was probably the only way to go until the possibility loomed that we might be able to have a pace lane here. The pace lane works so well down at the Peace Arch crossing that something has to be done so that we're not prisoners on this island.
Can you see any particular advantages of a pace lane, say, over a residence lane?
Well, the pace lane would provide access for Canadian residents who happen to have the pace permit as well, and a lot of the delay is occasioned by having to clear the border up there on their part.
Okay. Now, one of the arguments that I've heard against the idea of a pace lane is the idea that, of course, if that were to happen, if a large amount of Tsawwassen and Delta residents were to actually acquire the pace stickers, Point Roberts residents could essentially be in the same position. There would still be a great deal of congestion, and they'd still be in a lineup, not to mention what could happen when the pace lane was closed. So what do you think about that?
I thought that would occur down at the Peace Arch crossing. When they proposed this, I thought, oh, come on, it's not going to work. How would we ever get into the pace lane? And amazingly enough, as we go through there with that feeling of glee, all right, we can get to Bellingham. I'm always amazed at the many, many cars that choose to sit in the other lanes and who do not have pace permits. I suppose the same would apply here.
Have you ever found it to directly affect your business? I mean, here you are, you're pretty close to the border.
Not necessarily affecting our volume of business, but it's maddening to not be able to get here. And we have, in desperation, come north in the southbound lane a few times because it was the only way we could get here, and that should not be the way it is.
Death-defying actions.
Well, you do what you have to do, and that's what we sometimes have to do.
Any further thoughts on what could be done to improve the situation?
Well, yes, we definitely ought to have, just as a matter of general principle, another lane northbound on Tyee for holding lane. And if they were to make, say, the leftbound lane for residents only and leave Roosevelt open for residents only, then it would be possible for people to travel around the point without getting caught in a border lineup.
Well, I'm a resident of Point Roberts, so we manipulate our schedules to avoid border problems.
Are you in favor of a pace lane or a residence lane?
Absolutely.
Residence lane or pace lane?
I think probably a residence lane or a taxpayer, homeowner, property owner lane.
What I think about the border problems, I think they're horrific. I don't think that it's at all what we planned when we first came here, and I think that we really need to get hopping and get things done. The identification card and the smart card, the gate, all those things will help if we get them going, but we've got to get this tax thing going so that we can have some money, so that we can have the money to do the things that we need to do.
Okay, so now are you in favor of a residence lane or a pace lane?
Residence lane.
Jack Fraser is president of the Point Roberts Chamber of Commerce.
We know that the local economy depends largely on visitors and consumers from outside Point Roberts, BC specifically. How do we encourage this without actually trapping ourselves as residents inside the point?
I guess that's a very difficult question to answer in short. There have to be several solutions brought to the problem. First of all, having been a resident for 20 years, I've seen this happen, and it usually goes in spurts. When there's a beer strike in British Columbia, we get problems at our border. When there's a differential in gas costs, we see it at the border. These things have come and gone in the past, but I think with the recent years, there's been an increase in the level of activity to the point where we're finding it's almost a constant. We have to look at it from the point of view of where are we going from here, how are we developing. We've got to look down the future. We've got to talk to our county council and try and develop some solutions with them. I don't think that we as a community, we as individuals can get a solution. We have to work together with the county. So it's a multifaceted thing. It's not something that we can say, oh yes, we'll do this or we'll do that, because there's too many things involved in it. So we've got to draw together as a community and address these problems. And I think that things like we're doing now are accommodating and enabling us to do that.
How do you feel about a residents-only lane, and can you see that benefiting the community?
Another access lane to the point. First of all, you got to understand that we're fairly restricted at the border. What does that mean? Does that mean we're able to build a new lane for residents only, or does that mean we take a lane away from what we already have in existence? We have a pace lane over on the Pacific border, I should say the Douglas crossing. And it seems to be working very well. There's been a lot of discussions, and I understood up until a short time ago that it was looked like a very viable and a real thing for us. This is the pace lane, but I think that that has been opposed quite vehemently by our friends across the border.
Yes, it has.
And I think that we have to get something that kind of, gives both communities a comfort zone. The residents only, I don't know how that would be administered. We've talked about key cards, gates, etc., lanes. It was brought up during the Transpo study. It could be a solution, although there are a lot of things involved in it that could give rise to concern about who gets the cards, which roads are used, and so on and so forth. As a resident, I would love to see that. I would love to be able to plan my day so that I could go and get a haircut in Tawasin and have some assurance that I'm going to get back inside of 2 hours. When you're working and you have a 1 hour lunch, it's very hard to fit a haircut in it, which is not a problem for somebody living in Tawasin, but it certainly is for us down here.
So you feel that that there could be potential difficulties in terms of who would qualify to use the resident? Is that one of your concerns?
I would say that when you have a fluctuating residence situation like we have, where we're running 500 to 600 permanent residents, and in the summertime you're running 5,000 to 6,000 residents, and people are allowed to reside down here legally for 6 months out of the year. The thing is, where do you cut that situation? Are we talking about permanent residents? Are we talking about part-time residents?
It's extreme. I've lived here since 1967, and it's grown progressively worse, year after year. I think that the time has finally come for a residents-only lane. I don't know, it shouldn't be that hard to effect if we can get the Canadians to cooperate with it. I'm sure everyone on the American border would approve.
Do you find yourself planning your exits and your entrances, time jockeying as they call it?
For years I have done that, and I've just given up. I just go for it. If I want to go through the border, I go for it now. But yeah, on the weekends I think we're pretty much held prisoner here unless you allow 45 minutes to get through the border, and I don't think that's right.
I'm sort of a resident here, and it's been annoying many times. It'd be nice to see them arrange some way for the residents to get through with a card or a pace lane, but that's going to be a pretty expensive proposition too, I believe.
How is it for you on weekends?
Well, We don't go out too much on the weekend. We just stay in town. The weekends sometimes get pretty rough, and holidays. And it's one of those things that you just can't get away from. It's there.
I was more specific.
And now from Delta, we will hear Alderman Ann Claggett.
And found that, in fact, 1.9 million Canadians return into Canada each year from Point Roberts, which is almost the same number of people that come over on the ferries from Victoria and from Nanaimo. So the Canadians returning from Point Roberts to 56th Street in Tsawwassen are almost the same numbers. And I thought that was quite astounding, quite frankly. I was assured by the government, the customs people, that they are bringing in more income by having the PACE stickers than they were previously, and also it is the traffic's moving a lot quicker through the border at Blaine.
Could you tell us what your reaction would be to the concept of a pace lane at the Point Roberts crossing?
Well, I attend the Business Association meetings in Tsawwassen and Ladner, and they have a great deal of problem trying to keep the businesses in Tsawwassen as particularly competitive and viable, and they see that the downtown core is losing ground, if you would, and there are many more empty stores, and they blame a lot of it on people cross-border shopping, and they're probably quite correct. From the Point Roberts residents' point of view, I do not see that that would be a problem. I can't imagine why anybody wouldn't want a Point Roberts resident to have freer access, quicker access back and forth across the border. And I guess the only thing that I can say is if 1.9 million Canadians are returning over that border every year, there are Canadians who want to cross the border and come back for whatever reasons. And we cannot dictate and keep screaming and yelling and saying, you mustn't, thou shalt not. I can't understand, or we cannot control what people are going to do. The other day at a meeting I was at, one of the architects said with free trade now, he's doing almost as much business in Washington State, for an example, as he's doing in British Columbia. And he likes the PACE sticker because it gets him back and forth across the border quicker to do his business. And that's just one example of many examples, I'm sure.
Well, I'm one of the business owners here, and sometimes it really affects our business, but other times, that's what you have to put up with. We don't gripe too much. We like to have them come down, and I'd like to see more lanes open on the Canadian side. That's hard, especially on weekends like this, and the weather's nice. That really affects our business, how long it takes them to get across.
Okay, are you in favor of a residence or property owner's lane for here?
Yeah, being a resident here, I would like to see that. My children go to school in Blaine, and it's hard for me just to go to town and back, 45 minutes just to get home and back and forth. It does affect going anywhere, or doing any kind of shopping or banking on our own side to get back and forth. So,
would you be in favor of, say, a residence lane or a pace lane here in the Point?
Definitely.
You're in favor of a residence lane?
Yeah, resident lane. That would be only fair.
Greg Thompson is the acting Canada Customs Supervisor at the border crossing.
Your figures are showing significant yearly increases in traffic, both in and out of Point Roberts, with no signs of decreasing. What do you think accounts for that?
Well, basically, gasoline prices are obviously the biggest influence on this. We've got some grocery items. We've got a fairly major factor being an increase in commercial type traffic. Point Roberts is the closest U.S. mailing point to the greater Lower Mainland Business District. And as they become more and more aware of it, they take advantage of this fact. And finally, we do have, as you're probably well aware of down there, a large increase in recreation. Lots are selling, more people are coming, more people in the line.
Would you suggest or support any physical modifications to the border crossing that might improve the traffic flow in and out of Point Roberts?
Well, this would be a management decision, and the department is prepared to cooperate with any reasonable suggestion that helps make things better. We'd have to bear in mind that this particular border crossing is in a very, very unique situation in that we have an intersection immediately south of the border. So when traffic is staging to enter Canada, it's also being interfered with local traffic. And finally, since it is south of the border, while Canada Customs would be fully prepared to cooperate, it would really fall within the purview of any U.S. agency that's responsible for the road designs.
The two suggestions that have come forth for this border here at Point Roberts are a pace lane, which has received some pretty mixed reviews, and or a residents-only lane.
Well, since the two would be somewhat similar in type and design, particularly when you consider the confined locations that we have out there, at the moment the department has the pace lane running as a pilot project at Douglas. When they get the results back from the pilot project and seeing how well or unwell it works, you may see them give further direction as to what they would want to do along those lines. At this time, they would await the results of the pace lane pilot project, I would think, before they would do anything in that area.
Okay. Any other thoughts on the situation?
Basically, what we've covered is the unpredictability of the traffic, which is probably, of all the factors we've discussed, the single most unique aspect to this particular crossing, since it's so small and can be so volatilely affected so quickly that 5 minutes difference in your lineup determines how quickly you're going to move. And unfortunately, it's pretty difficult to have anybody there to cover it exactly when it doesn't move the way you want it to.
So that's a prime concern, the issue of unpredictability.
Yes, it's something that we're looking at all the time. We're monitoring our statistics. We're trying to monitor this traffic flow. But it's like, quite frankly, trying to predict the weather. In fact, the weather causes most of it. So.
Drastic. That's about the best I can describe it. You know, when you're crossing the border several times, the lineups are, and I don't know how they can get a third lane in there for the citizens living here.
Well, would you be in favor, if it was possible, of a property owner's or a residence lane here?
I suppose, yes, it would be great. You know, but how do you get one?
It's always so backed up and everything. I like the pace lane, like at the lane border. I wish we could do something like that here.
Now, do you like a pace lane, or do you like the idea of a residence lane, say for property owners and bona fide renters and so on?
Well, residence lane would be even better than pace lane. Yeah, that would be really great. Because we have a real hard time getting out of here a lot of times. So.
While the border situation at Point Roberts is far from being resolved, a long, hard look is being taken at the problem. This is Shelley Gitlitz for the Point Bulletin. Thank you for being with us.
We hope you enjoyed the show. If you have any comments or suggestions, please feel free to write us at the All Point Bulletin, Post Office Box 1451, Point Roberts, Washington, 98281. In our last show, we talked to people involved in bringing a primary school to Point Roberts. We are pleased to report the state funding passed and the school was approved. There is a very strong possibility that we will have a school here in Point Roberts for the 1992-93 school year, with a permanent structure being completed in time for the following year. This was the Point Bulletin, and we'll see you next time.